Okay, we have everything we need to get started. We have an editor. We have a .py file that we can actually play around with. We had downloaded and installed Python, and we started the Python 3 installation, and then we ran the scripts. Well, actually, we just ran the program. So we're in the developer environment. So I want to talk about the very first concept, and it's probably the most common concept that there is in programming, and that's going to be the concept of a variable. Now, anybody that's done math has gone through and done something like x equals 3. Well, the 3 is the value that is assigned to the variable. So the variable in this equation is x. Now I want to talk about the way programming languages function, because if I'm going to set a variable and assign a value to that variable, I have to have a place to store that. And what ends up happening is I store that in a memory space. So if I were to take all of the operational memory available for my desktop, my laptop, whatever it is I'm using, and what I could do is I could actually break up the memory space into a lattice, into a grid. And then what I can do is I can utilize these memory spaces such that I can store values. So as an example, x equals 3, whereby in my analogy here, this is going to be where I would actually place the information associated with the variable of x. Now that's interesting, because then I could come over and I could have a setup here where we could say y equals 2. So as an example, I could say that's the value for the variable of y. Now, interestingly enough, if I came over here and created another variable and I said a equals 3, what will end up happening is Python will not put 3 anywhere else in here, because right now we already know that x equals 3, and since that has already been predefined, what we're going to find is that in Python, the variable a is also going to point to this exact memory space because it is 3. Now when we look at this, like I said, we have the value. So that's what's stored. So the value is the information that's going to be stored. The variable is going to be the name, the unique name, that's going to make reference to that memory space. And it's also important to understand that there is an actual memory space. There's going to be a designation. Every one of these individual grids or squares in the overall grid is going to be referenced by a number. And identical values will be stored in the exact same memory space. This prevents the system from actually exceeding the memory or wasting memory space. So what will end up happening here is this 3 is actually going to be the value associated to variable x and variable a. And the system is going to keep careful track of that. Now, the variable, first of all, we have to understand it is case sensitive. So a is not equal to a. They are perceived to be as being different values. And it's also important to understand that there are different ways that we can actually create these variable names. And there's rules governing this. I'll introduce you guys to the style guide here shortly. But the object is that for the most part, we have a tendency to use one of two notation types. So whenever I come up with a name, I have one of two notation types. The first one is called Camel Case. Now, Camel Case is kind of like what we see a lot of times in routing. So as an example, in routing, we'll see a value in here called max age. And let's say 300 seconds. So max age, where some values are capitalized the rest of the word are not, and then the next word is capitalized and the rest of it is not, that is referred to as camel case notation. And it's a pretty common way of doing things. Let me move my laptop out of the way here. The next one is referred to as snake case. Snake case would be the exact same thing, only I would come over here and say max underscore age. And if I had another value, let's just say underscore 1, and then say equals 300. What ends up happening here is these are going to be the exact same value, which means they're going to be occupying the same grid. However, I'm going to have two different variable names that are going to be pointing to them because they are not the same, because they are, like I said, case sensitive. And in this instance, we're using camel case. In this instance, we're using snake case. Now, when we look at what happens when we set up these variables, it's got to be noted that there's also another component to this. The biggest component to this is going to be the fact that we are going to be storing information. And that information that we're going to be stored is going to be stored based on what we call its data type. Now, the cool news is that in Python, unlike programming language like C and C#, what ends up happening is the system will actually dynamically type the value. So when I enter a value, if I enter 1, the system is going to dynamically type that as an integer. So that will be an int number. If I type in Terry, my name, as a value, the system is going to look at that and it's going to say, oh, that is a string. It's an alphanumeric string. If I type in 1.3, Python will look at that and say, oh, that is what is referred to as a floating point integer. So it just is a fancy way of saying it has a decimal value to it. So this typing that takes place in Python, the good news is it's dynamic. So we've got a lot of things that we need to talk about, and data types are really going to be important. And the thing is that we have to keep in mind that Python has an entire range of what are referred to as built-in data types. And what we're going to do is in the next video, we're going to explore those. But before I do that, I want to illustrate some things here. And I want to assign some values, demonstrate the way that we can look at those values. And then what we're going to do is we're going to move into a conversation about the data types. So I'll see you guys in that video. I'm going to go ahead and just stop right here, and then I'll insert another video. And then we'll pick up with a conversation about the built-in data types. So we'll see you guys in that video.